Hello and welcome to this webinar on emotionally based school avoidance. I'm Vicky Norris and I'm one of the educational psychologists within Bradford's educational psychology team. This webinar is a prelude to the Cube Run course that will be running on the 17th of November and will give a brief overview of what we mean by emotionally based school avoidance, how we can identify it, and strategies that we can use to support children and young people. If after accessing the webinar you feel like you would like more information, you can still sign up for the longer course on the 17th of November. Okay, I would just like to begin by acknowledging the guidance that has been produced by West Sussex Educational Psychology Service. They're really leading the way in this area, and a number of local authorities have adapted and adopted this guidance. The guidance is freely available on their local offer website, and I have used some of their resources and assessment tools in developing this training, so I would recommend taking a look. So as you've signed up for this webinar, I would imagine that you do have some awareness of the issue and term emotional-based school avoidance, but it may be that you've heard it referred to in other ways or other words to describe it, perhaps school refusal or school-based anxiety. The term is used as an umbrella term to describe a group of children who have severe difficulty in attending school due to emotional factors. And often that emotional factor is anxiety-based, and some people do refer to it as an anxiety-based school avoidance. This can result in prolonged absence from school, but sometimes it may not. It may result in issues around transition or issues leaving the home in the morning or difficulties with concentrating. So it's important to be aware of that. It isn't a diagnosis, but it's a definition of need, and it's important that we really are looking at those emotional aspects and how to support them. Okay, so just a little bit about prevalence. I'm not sure how much of an issue you found it in your setting, and the data may not be very robust because we don't have consistent guidance and clear guidance on what we should record and how. UK literature estimates that it's 1 to 2% of the student population, and that this is higher in secondary school pupils. However, it's equally common in males and females, and there's little evidence of a link to socioeconomic status. It's also significantly higher in children with ASC. The onset may be sudden or gradual, but we usually recognise some trigger point or event that has led to emotional distress or anxiety associated with school. This could be associated with school attendance. It could be a bereavement or something at home, changing the family dynamic, or it could be an issue in school, such as bullying or academic demands. It could be a build-up of struggling with the school environment. Sometimes that event would lead to a sudden decline in attendance or these behaviours, but sometimes we see more gradual onset as the anxiety is reinforced over time. We know that there are peaks at transitions between schools and between phases, so it's important to be aware of some of those signs that people are experiencing anxiety associated with school attendance, because then we can intervene early and be proactive to support those students at transition points. So these may be terms or phrases or comments I'm familiar with you. School refuser has been used the term to describe school avoidance in the past. Also, children often described as controlling or manipulative, but I just like to think about the fact that those words cite the problem very much within the child, and don't really acknowledge the emotional basis of the difficulty of attending school. Also, you may hear phrases such as reassuring comments to parents that they're fine once they're in school, which are very well intended, or sometimes concerns that it is the parent and the parent-child interaction. And whilst they are all valid points, and we do recognise that there are within child factors and factors in the family and the home, the impact on EBSA, we also recognise that the school environment and relationships within school and perceptions of school are a factor, and we need to consider that in order to intervene appropriately, and also in order to work most effectively with parents and students. So where's this idea of fine in school coming from? So it is actually a legitimate comment from school staff, because often children and young people do appear fine in school, but I'd like you to take a moment to think about your own experiences of anxiety or stress and how you may manage that. You may be particularly stressed at interviews or perhaps delivering training, but you manage to contain that to present a mask of being fine. So a lot of children can mask that anxiety, but also anxiety can dissipate once the perceived threat is removed. So once we get over the threshold and into the school door, or once we're on an aeroplane or on a roller coaster, we have that fear. Once we get through that beginning bit, sometimes our anxiety does go down. There's a little link there to a website, Not Fine in School, which is a parent organisation, which really just an advocacy group and information for parents and professionals around the issue of young people who appear fine in school and they're not. So going back a little bit to that why, so as I've already mentioned, it is a complex interplay of child, school and home factors, but every case will be different, and we really need to look at it on an individualised basis and assess that need so that we can intervene effectively. So people talk about school refusal occurring when stress exceeds support, when risks are greater than resilience, and when pull factors that promote school non-attendance overcome the push factors that encourage attendance. So really what we need to think about when we're doing that individual assessment is, what are those pull factors that are pulling the young person away from school, and how can we reduce some of those? And then what are the extra push factors that we could put in place to encourage attendance? So thinking about the emotional basis of the school avoidance and the fact that at the core of that is anxiety, just want to spend a moment reminding you about that anxiety cycle. You could for a moment think about something that makes you feel anxious. For example, it may be attending an interview. So if you had anxious feelings about an interview, you'd have negative thoughts about your ability to cope in that situation. And for some people, because remember, anxiety is when it impacts on functions, when we call it like when it's having a significant impact. So when it's severe, we might avoid that situation. So we may not ever apply for a job, or we may not go to the interview when we get offered an interview. And when we do that, we get an immediate relief and a sense of, that's a good thing. You feel better, the anxiety goes away. So that reinforces to us that actually I did the right thing by avoiding it, and then that because I feel better now, and that actually increases the anxiety and the anxious feelings about school and creates this kind of negative cycle of heightened anxiety by avoiding the situation that invokes anxiety. Also, in the case of school refusal, what we see is when children avoid school, they fall behind in their schoolwork and they lose friends and get an increased sense of isolation. And that again can increase those negative thoughts about their ability to cope, which will again further increase their anxiety. At the same time, they may be engaging in pleasurable activities at home that are relaxing, calm and safe, which will decrease their feelings to return to school. So we can really get quite an entrenched pattern of behaviours the longer a young person is out of school. So, what are the signs? So obviously, you're probably very aware of children who've been away from school for a prolonged period. But as I mentioned, we really need to try and think about the children and young people before they get to that point, because intervention is more likely to be successful before the behaviours become very entrenched. That's not to say we can't work with those children. We just want to intervene as early as possible. So thinking about children who are reluctant to leave the home, or we know the parents are aware of their absence. Maybe they can't get out of the car in the morning, or the transition is very difficult. Starting to see a pattern of regular absences, particular subjects, or after weekends, perhaps as minor illnesses that they're being away from school with, and thinking about younger children or children who have communication difficulties or emotional needs, they may not be aware of their worries and anxieties. So sometimes it can come out in somatic physical symptoms such as headaches, tummy ache. The young person may want very much to be in school but have this freeze response of being unable to do so. And so we may see some underachievement because the impact of the anxiety will mean that the young person finds it hard to concentrate, or also they're missing school, so they're getting behind, and the social isolation, avoidance can occur when they feel disconnected from their peer group, or perhaps that's part of the issue that they struggle with peer interactions, but both of those things will further exacerbate the difficulty. Sometimes you may see challenging behaviours. Again, if we're thinking about that anxiety response and those fight behaviours when young people become overwhelmed, will lead to kind of depression, isolation, and low self-esteem and lack of confidence, which will again exacerbate the, the, the difficulty. And yes, just to emphasise again those physical changes that you may see, which are signs that a young person is anxious. Finally, just a little timeline there to think about how the difficulty progresses, and really thinking about those young people who are showing some anxiety, maybe some somatic symptoms, or those behaviours in the morning to avoid schools, or the lateness in the morning. Trying to get in early before we get further down the timeline and making sure we have an intervention and respond to every point. Okay, so when we're aware we've identified we have some concerns, what should we do? So as I've mentioned, it is quite a complex interplay, so we need to make sure we're involving parents and the young person and all the people who know the young person well to kind of work out what are those push and pull factors, what extent is the anxiety, what are the factors, is it a social anxiety, are there fears of academic failure going on, and that will help inform our interventions. Just a moment for thinking about working with parents, and those parents who are often told that the children are fine, or feel that the school are frustrated with them. It's just a quote from one of the parent websites I found. To be told this is a problem, and this is what you can do to change it, might have been helpful. To be told you're doing okay would be supportive. To day in, day out, cope with an unhappy child, and other parents judging me as we walked in late, and school making me feel it's my fault, and constantly receiving absent letters with threats of more serious consequences is exhausting and making me ill too. I mean, for parents who are dealing with this issue, it is exhausting and it is distressing and can have a real impact on their own mental health. Imagine having a child who is terrified of going to school or who presents with really challenging behaviours every morning, but yet you're still taking them to this place that they don't want to go and they fear. And then you are being judged or looked upon by the parents or criticised by the school. I'm sure there are some cases that are more obvious where we are aware of the anxiety, but I know from my own experience there are still occasions where very much the problem is cited from the parent, and in doing so, we can exacerbate the problem further because if we look at this cycle here, if a child is worried and afraid of school and the school blames the parents or sees the problem as the parent-child relationship, the parent can feel attacked or become defensive and protective of the child, and they'll also blame the school for not recognising the difficulty, and become quite anxious about school and approaching school. And that will reinforce the child's anxiety about school because they actually see, well, the parent feels quite anxious about school, and we end up again in a bit of a negative and helpful cycle. And thinking just a little bit about that, and to be clear that in terms of the law, where there is evidence of EBSA, prosecution would not be appropriate because this is deemed a health reason. And the local authority attendance guidance is quite clear that when we're looking at prosecutions or concerns about attendance, we really need to evidence the work that we have done with a family to support them or to understand what is the nature of the non-attendance. Just a little bit of time now thinking about working with a child young person and that importance of gathering the pupil voice. For some children and people who've been out of school a while and haven't had contact, they may have a real fear of contact. They're sometimes using a different adult or a less direct method, such as an email, a phone call, a text message, or a peer contact, using a peer email, text message, or contact. Then if you've made that contact as a child still in school, thinking about young people who aren't as good at expressing and talking through their worries, you could use drawing, getting them to draw out their fear or their, what school is like for them and how they feel, or do an ideal classroom activity where you get them to draw the perfect classroom and the world's worst classroom and ask them questions to find out about it. We do have a script for that on the full training course. Thinking about sorting activities and talking that, so you might have aspects of school and home, and you get them to say big problem, no problem, not a problem, or there are some school wellbeing cards that have been produced by one of the educational psychologists who work in West Sussex and available on her website. And that looks at the actual risk and resilience factors associated with school avoidance based on research. And then you can get them to sort those things about like me, not like me. And we can also get them to rank them about the most significant issues. And that will again help us think about what are the key push and pull factors where we need to target intervention. Finally, we can also think about like using thermometers and scaling activities, or some of the talking approaches where we kind of use psychoeducation to think about anxiety and to externalize it. So to think about what 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 is this feeling, or how is it when this feeling comes, or can you remember a time when the feeling wasn't there? Okay, just some general intervention strategies, thinking about actually that return to school now. Once we've got the pupil voice done, we've spoken to parents, we've unpicked some of the issues, we've found out from staff. So we would recommend a return to school at the earliest opportunity. That doesn't mean a full return where stress may exceed support and we're going to overwhelm the child and reinforce anxiety. It may be a very gradual return, it may be a meet and greet, it may just be a meeting. It's at the child's pace. But the sooner that we can get them in, the sooner we can change that cycle of avoidance and increased anxiety. So make sure we're planning phone calls and contact and it's direct with parents. Don't send them letters that have those interactions. Make sure we agree a plan with everybody involved and a review date, and that we stick to it, and that everybody's communicating and knows what their role is in the plan. So we could think about other agency referrals, such as early help, if we think there are some issues around the parent getting the child in, or if they're struggling with behaviours at home. If we think there are more school-based issues, such as how they feel around school or how they're accessing the environment, maybe the educational psychology team or the skill team. Just thinking generally about reducing anxiety and resilience. So predictable routines, consistent environment, relationships, key adult and mentor, feeling a sense of belonging and welcome. And also having a safe place for those young people who do get anxious, and knowing that they can go to that safe place, and having all adults accept that, and not having some adults question that anxiety. A lot of young people speak about adults questioning the legitimacy of their feelings. And we really need to listen to young people if they're going to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose and agency and control within the school environment. And I've also mentioned the application of attendance and behaviour policy, recognising the emotional basis of some of the behaviours we are seeing. Some other strategies now, just for like thinking about the school day a little bit more, just bearing in mind that when young people come in after a very difficult transition, when they're anxious, that we may need to give them some time to adjust and be ready for learning. If you've just been in something that you've got through a situation you find quite stressful, you're not always ready to focus and learn. And by sending them straight in, again, we may reinforce their anxieties. A little check-in you may do, such as share it, shelf it, shout it, where you may give them the option to share the problem, to shelf it until later, or to shout about it. Young people who can't communicate as well verbally, we might get them to write and rip, or they write something down and rip it up, or draw a picture. We could get them to make a Play-Doh model of how they feel, or of their worry monster. We could get them to do some box breathing, where we get them to breathe in, deep for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. Or we could do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, a mindfulness strategy, where we're getting them to use all their senses. So 5 things we can see, 4 things we can feel, 3 things we can hear, 2 things we can smell. One is the taste we can look quite hard to, and one thing I really like to do, like a nice memory. But that again is just kind of changing their sensory system, so we're dealing with the anxiety at a physical level to support regulation. Giving young people a signal for overwhelm that everybody accepts and recognises. Thinking about break time and do we need some adjustments? Is break time an issue? Thinking about the predictability of Monday morning in particular, who will be there, what's the arrangements with the parents, do they know what is coming? And a lot of those ideas and strategies will apply to children on the autistic spectrum. But I just want to remind you a little bit about the fact that we know that anxiety is often more common in children with ASC because particularly in adolescence as they get older and they're facing more complex interactions and they're more aware of their differences. They struggle to read the context, their planning and organisation skills, their difficulty with understanding what other people are thinking and feeling, or dealing with uncertainty, or in terms of the predictability of the school day, the sensory issues, the frequent transitions, their focus on detail. It can make a school environment, particularly secondary school, extremely exhausting, though some young people will master this. And we know just from our own local data of the number of children accessing tracks that a third of those are on the assessment pathway or have a diagnosis for autism. So it is a real issue. And I think for children and people with autism, we need to think very much around the same strategies and picking those needs, but we also need to think about those environmental factors and how we reduce some of those demands of the school day so that we're not overwhelming our students with ASC. Finally, just a little note on thinking about whole school approach. It's really great if you have some great committed pastoral staff who work really hard with parents and young people to engage them and get them back into school. But really, we need to be thinking beyond that to have the biggest impact. Is everybody aware of this issue? Are people aware of that timeline so they can spot those early warning signs? Are the attendance officers monitoring trends? Are we doing preventative work, such as thinking about how predictable our environment is, how consistent it is? Are we thinking about social skills interventions and quiet spaces for those students who do get more anxious in the school environment? And how can you promote that and go away from here today to share some information? The little wheel has been made into an audit tool, and that is available in the West Sussex guide that I mentioned in the beginning. So that's my summary for today. So hopefully you'll think there are some bits of knowledge that you've taken with you that will help you supporting a child or young person, and have at least one practical step that you think you can do to support a student known to you. Maybe begin to share some information and develop some whole school approaches. If you would like more information, the full morning course is on the 17th of November and can be booked by a school for Bradford. Thank you.